morning, ladies and gents. Just one. Right, good morning, ladies and gents. Right, a very good morning to everyone and welcome to the annual Investec Business Breakfast. This is our second consecutive year of hosting this event and has become a highlighted fixture of our calendar. We had a great turnout of 133 guests this morning, and thank you very much for your support. We appreciate it. Thanks. Just going into the proceedings, all the thank yous. First of all, I'd like to thank the Zalze Lodge, the team of Werner Burger and Melvin de Kock for accommodating our guest speakers. Thank you for your friendly hospitality. We really appreciate it. And then also to Kleine Zalze Winery, Kobus Passon and Johan Besby for all their continued support for the club. And then also to Fruit Juice, Sir Juice, all the juices on the tables. A great thank you to all of them. And then comes to our main sponsor from Investec. I would like to thank Guigo van der Aarje, Head of Investec Winelands, and his team, Ladine and Colette, for all of their work and working together with our team of putting this event together. Not only are they part of the business breakfast and main sponsors, but also one of our main sponsors of the club, and we value your support. Thank you very much. So with any further ado now, I'd just maybe like to call up Fick just to say a few words. Thanks, Fick.
Goedemorgen, dames en heren, voor jullie prachtige dag op Stellenbosch. I'm going to speak in English, so it's not going to be long. Many people ask me, what does Investec do? And then, some people know just a small bit of what we do. And I think it's appropriate, so that in a nutshell, I want to explain to you what Investec does. In the first place, we are a private bank, but we've also got a corporate bank. And all of these services are delivered from Stellenbosch. And if you look at the private bank, it is split up in two. It's the finance division and also the wealth and investment division. If one look at the banking, in the first place, you will have your normal professional people, entrepreneurs, self-employed people, and we call it the high income banking division. And then together with that, we've got the high net worth division, where we do more intricate deals and more intricate solutions for our clients. And it's financing anything from your car to your home or business, so it's a wide application. Then we have in the private bank also private capital, which are more your entrepreneurs. Working capital is financed there, and stock and things like that. That part of our business also sometimes take up equity shares in companies where we think there's a good jockey and a good business case, and we help people to build their balance sheets. Then we've got specialized property, that is shopping centers, developments, big kind of buildings, commercial buildings and so on. And so that's a big part of our business, and we do have specialists that can help you with property finance. So that's the part of the banking. If I look at the wealth investment side, we are the biggest managers of private money in South Africa, private clients' money, and the third largest in the UK. So it's a total international business. And we specialize in bespoke share portfolios. That is our speciality. But we've got a lot of other products as well, like guaranteed products in dollars and in pounds and euros and all of that. And where your capital is guaranteed and you get certain returns. There are private equity investments that you can do, sections 12J, and a lot of other investments that's actually provided by Wealth and Investment. We are also truly international. The private bank's got branches in Mauritius, in Switzerland, in Guernsey, and in the UK, in London. There's a big part of our business there. And what it means, you can actually open a bank account in London, in the UK, within a few minutes, not a few minutes, under an hour. You can have a bank account, then you'll get your card within a week. So we make it very easy for you to do international banking. Then if you look at the wealth business, again, also about, I said we are the third largest manager of funds in the UK. And so we've got a very good knowledge of international shares and investments. Then last year we started with a life business. So if you're an investor client, you can get life insurance. We've got very interesting products there. You get a product that if your bond is 50 Rand a month, you don't pay any premium. If your bond is 5 million, you pay the premium for 5 million, and as your bond goes up and down, you pay less or more. So it's one of the interesting products that we have in the life side. Then if we look at the corporate side, that is more your big institutions like listed companies and big corporates. It's like, for example, financing Boeing's and aviation business and that. So we've also got a corporate finance business. Yeah, in total, that gives you an idea what it is that we are doing. We also win many awards. We've been, for the last 6 years, we've been awarded, we've been voted the best private bank in South Africa and the best wealth manager in South Africa. 6 years in a row for both of them. Visa as a company worldwide, a few billion users, and many institutions that use the Visa card system. We won there the card with the less fraud in the world, and also the card that's the most widely accepted in the world. So that's another award that we won. But it's not about awards. You know, our philosophy is that it's about the clients. We are totally client-centric, and all of these businesses work together to find solutions for clients. And although we are digitally very strong and we look at the digital world and we invest a lot of money in digital banking and that, we believe in personal relationships. So that is and that's the only way how you can really understand people's needs. So you personalize everything, and you have an intelligent, warm body of flesh and blood that you can talk to, and who can help you with your needs. Thank you.
Right, so thank you, Theo. I would now like to introduce our guest speakers and panel to you. On your right, a facilitator, Dr. Piet Croucamp, who is a political analyst, a familiar face from last year's event, and well-known speaker and TV presenter. Welcome. Nice having you here this morning. And then on your left, far left, is Theo Venter, political and policy specialist at the Northwest University School for Business and Governance. Welcome. Nice having you here too. Also a familiar face from last year. And then Prof. Mohammed Karaan, Professor in Agricultural Economics of Stellenbosch University. The Prof is also an avid golfer and a member of the Zalze Golf Club, and it's really great having you here this morning. Thank you, Prof. And then our last guest speaker, Elizabeth Fick, is from Investec. Elizabeth, welcome. Lizzie is an admitted attorney and tax specialist. She's also the only lady on the panel this morning. And thank you very much for gracing us with your presence this morning. So just going forward, the proceedings, we'll have the discussion. There'll be a Q&A session after the discussion, and then we'll call up our club captain to come up and just say a few words. And so I'd now like to hand you over to Dr. Piet Croucamp. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would just like to undermine my panel when I start. They are probably going to tell you nothing has changed, that they expected, everything that they expected was in the budget, and that you couldn't expect much, and that was also in the budget. I would just like, by introduction, I would just say I think a lot has changed. I think there was a massive change in the start of the SONA. The president during the SONA, he didn't speak to the great unwashed and the populace outside. He didn't speak to the opposition benches. He spoke to his own party. He said to them, there's a new kid on the block, there will be new rules, and he realized that large sections and constituencies within his own party is not necessarily behind him. And he was saying to them, but you're either in or you ship out now. So the day is when Max de Pre, my good friend Max de Pre, said the president is spineless, I thought it was over with the SONA. He was speaking to his own constituency, his own party, more than to anybody else. And I think Tito Mboweni yesterday did exactly the same thing when he said to, and I think he looked to the ANC bench when he said, this Moscovite attitude towards SOEs and privatization, or contending narratives, competing narratives, that's also, we better get over that now. I think that sets the tone, I think, for pretty much what the the Ramaphosa presidency is all about. And I really think the budget should be seen in that context. So if the facts and the figures disappoint you, or the president, when he didn't really say what you wanted him to say, because there's no money. You can't make promises and you can't change things if you don't have money to change things. But it also makes sense to get your house in order. If you hope that somebody will in some other way invest some money in you and get the thing going. And I think yesterday he was talking about the state, how we will reconfigure the state. And there is no other way. We have to rely on the private owners of capital to come to the party to change things. So I will start with Elizabeth because she's the tax expert here. The president, we are, by the way, we are the 9th tax to GDP. We're 9th highest tax country in the world. We are in the illustrious company of Swaziland, Lesotho and Namibia being above us, Denmark being second, which is the only Scandinavian country up there, and you would expect that all three of them will be up there. But anyway, so we are highly taxed. Tito Mboweni didn't lower the corporate tax. We in fact had a tax increase because it didn't make provision for bracket creep yesterday. So are we in for a rough? Is it the middle class that's going to pay for this? Who's paying for this?
Yeah, so, you know, I was shitting myself thinking that I have only a few hours to understand what is going to be said in the budget and then relay that to all of you and take you through all these complex changes that we thought we may see. But then I was reminded that it's actually an election year. And so from tax-wise, it was actually quite an uneventful budget. And the surprising thing, a lot of us thought that we would see, if we had to see any changes and increases come through, it would be more wealth taxes, so increased donations tax or increase in estate duty, possibly a STT increase, securities transfer tax. And none of those came through. And it's exactly what you said. It's income, the percentages weren't increased, so we didn't see an increase in the percentages, but the inflation was not accounted for. And the surprising thing about that, it's not actually a wealth tax, and it's not actually the wealthy that feel it, it's the middle class that feels it. You know, secondly, we were hoping to see some kind of corporate decrease in taxes, but you know, that could never happen because, as you said, there's no money. And again, we pay extremely high corporate tax rates. It's 28%. If you look at other countries, you know, we were chatting earlier, Brazil, sitting at, I think, 15% currently.
But why do you think he postponed the inevitable? He didn't say yesterday, listen, we're going to break up ESCOM, this is what it would look like, we get private partners in, equity partners. Why didn't he say that? It's almost as if he kicked the can down the road, as if something will happen on later. Why was that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know why he didn't say that. I mean, but we're hoping to see future changes. I think a strong theme that we saw coming through in the budget was that actually, instead of focusing on increasing and changing tax rates, they need to focus on SARS themselves and fixing the infrastructure within SARS. I mean, they said a new commissioner will be appointed. They said that they're going to be focusing on the large business unit again, focusing on revenue collection, sorting out backlogs that there are in SARS. So I think if they can get that right, and it's actually encouraging for us to see that they realize that taxpayers are stretched as they are, and there are actually not enough people to tax. And increasing tax rates are not going to solve for our budget deficit, and rather, if we focus on fixing our infrastructure and SARS, get the SARS sorted and back to its former glory, we could actually achieve a lot more. So that was encouraging.
Mohammed, they talk about 23 billion rand that will be allocated to ESCOM alone. And they will do that in 3 years. And some people made the sums, the economists, they say, well, we're talking about 150 billion. We might talk about 230 billion over 10 years. Where's that money going to come from?
Well, firstly, I think you have this impression that there is not enough money to go around. So he's trying to do things, you know, tweak margin. There is enough money. The thing is, it's how you prioritize the money. Now, Tito could have gone out and taken the budget and radically changed things about. To give you an example, we spend 30 billion a year on land reform for which we achieve very little. Nothing in fact. So he could have taken that budget and moved it somewhere else. The problem with doing that is when you spend 60%, 70% of that budget on people, on people in government, it's not so easy to move the people around, even though you can move the money around. But there is space in that money to reallocate had he wanted to. So his real choice was, the country is really at an inflection point on different matters. It's an inflection point. I'm saying inflection point and not a turning point or not a threshold, because with regard to the economy, with regard to government, with regard to nationhood, with regard to business confidence, with regard to the brain drain or land issues or water issues, we've all come to this inflection point where he's got to decide we're going into a new direction on this. But to go into that new direction, this is not the time for big ideas. And to put those big ideas at risk of the politics of an election year. I think he chose the other route. He said, let's take responsibility for the situation. Let's get the governance right. Let's introduce the austerity that's necessary for this. Let's send out, as you said, it's a message to the ruling party more than anyone else that we've got to first fix ourselves before we can fix these other things, before we can fix the economy, grow the economy, and get the business confidence back. I think those issues will come after the elections. I think he's also learned from the SONA. If I can be critical of our president, the SONA wasn't the SONA. SONA is something where you say, what's the state of the nation given what we said last year and what did we reach this year? What he did was say, what's the future going to be like? So he was trying to sell the future, and it didn't bring about the business confidence or the general confidence that he had hoped for. So I think he was a little precocious in doing that. And Tito, I think, learned from that and said, we've got to fix what's wrong first before we go out to the big ideas.
I'll get to you now, but I just know we're going to borrow 1.2 billion rand every day, every work day. We're going to borrow 1.2. We will borrow 235 billion rand. Soon our debt will be 60% of GDP. We owe 1.5 trillion rand in debt that we have. How do you think? How does that fit in with that idea of yours that he's just rearranging the deck chairs here? It's obviously there's a shortage of money. It's not as if we can just take money here and send it there. There is no money. There's a shortage. We can see it from the borrowing. We can see it from our debt levels.
It was interesting that he very specifically also mentioned yesterday that he's prepared to carry on for longer. And that comes from 2-3 weeks ago. We had an engagement about growing the economy at Treasury, where he said, I'm unlikely to be the minister after the elections. And I think that brought about an air of uncertainty. Is he going to be the minister or not? This thing says, what you're saying about the deficit and how we finance the deficit is not something peculiar to this year. We've lived with this for the last 20 years of spending more than we earn. But he knows he cannot change it right now because of the risk of the election. After the elections, he's going to try and change it. Our real risk in the scenario we're facing, on the fiscal situation that we have, is that we might start borrowing money from the IMF and the World Bank, and then become a slave to those institutions and go into a downward spiral for a very, very long time. So I think one has to see this budget in what's he going to do June this year to change things about.
Theo, I disagree with my two colleagues here in the sense that I don't think this budget was about the elections. I honestly think, the same with the SONA, the President just said, this is what's going to be. You can't change the ideological narrative before an election, and he did that. The President did so, Tito Mboweni did so yesterday. He provided over 200 million rand extra for the Zondo Commission. The ANC is in trouble all the time at the Zondo Commission. So why do people think it might be an election budget? I don't think so.
Well, I think it's an election budget because the election is on the 8th of May. That's obvious.
That's the only thing.
That is the obvious. But what I liked about what I heard, if I can take the SONA and the budget just for a moment. Previously, our SONAs were cut and paste stuff. There was no line through the SONA with our previous president. In the 9 wasted years, which is now an established concept. What we saw in the SONA was the president doing a very interesting thing, saying, I'm going to present to you a SONA, and you're right about the future, but these are the following 4 brackets or points that I'm going to deal with. And Tito Mboweni took on the same points. He added a 5th, which brings about a kind of a similarity in terms of looking at things, which I thought hasn't happened since the Mbeki or the manual days where the SONA spoke to the budget. Previously it was 2 separate things. Last year's budget, you'll remember, was done by Malusi Gigaba. And then, or was it Nene?
Malusi is the one.
Malusi, which of course sometimes last year fell on his own sword, which I still think is a highly exaggerated kind of comparison. But I think if it was a budget aimed at the election, there would have been other things in the budget. This is a containment budget, and remember, we will have a second SONA after the election. This is the end of the 5th Parliament. Once the election is over, we'll start with the 6th Parliament since 1994. I think then we will have the kind of SONA that one would have thought he would have presented 2 weeks ago. But I think this budget that we've got at the moment, there are political things in the budget which one wouldn't say before an election. Let me provide you with one example. Somewhere halfway through the budget, Tito did a Tito thing. He looked at Terra Nakota, and I think he mentioned Gwere Montage and 2 or 3 others, and he said, guys, you were our heroes in the 70s when you told the people not to pay so as not to support the apartheid system. Now you have to turn that around. You'll have to go back to your constituencies, because unless they start paying for services, we cannot sustain this project. That to me was a very telling point, a very interesting point. That's political. Because that's the only way in which we can turn it around. The real stuff of elections, you'll find in the 3rd and the 4th attachments or addendums to the budget. I know in National Treasury they're talking about the auntie. The auntie is the DORA, the Division of Revenue Act. That's where you'll find how much goes to this province, how much goes to local government, and those kind of things. There, and unless you go through those things, you'll only start seeing what's happening. What I can see all around the country are projects, especially infrastructure projects, getting off the ground. Housing projects suddenly being kicked around. So those things are happening deeper down, and it's probably supported by what goes on in the budget. But I agree with you that overtly, it wasn't a budget that one would say, we're dropping the interest rates because it's an election year. That they didn't do.
My good friend Mike Schuster tells me there's 2 million people working in our government. We keep talking about 1 million, but if you add local government, the provincial government, you actually get 2 million people. Tito Mboweni tries to get it in some other way of 30,000. I mean, that's a drop in the bucket. It's meaningless when he says that. And even the process, according to which he's going to do, is try to avoid some ideological collision with unions and stuff. So where are we going to get the money? Because the money that he wants to spend on infrastructure is negligible. There's not a lot of money there. The savings is not obvious that he's going to make, even he talks about it. But in some other way, we have to get the economy growing. Has he said anything that gave you the impression that there's some sort of an agreement with entrepreneurs in the private sector or somebody that they will kickstart the economy some, because the 300 billion that we borrow in the international markets is around about what our interest in our debt is annually. So there's no money in the system here. How are they going to get the economy to grow at the 1.5% that they foresee and the 2.2% that they foresee in 2 or 3 years?
So one of the things we were hoping we would see in the budget this year was a decrease in dividends tax rates, which we didn't. It went up from 15 to 20. We were hoping it would come back down to 15. The reason is that to stimulate growth, you need to encourage investors to come and invest in South Africa. Mauritius has done a really good job as setting themselves up as the entry into Africa. And ideally it should actually be South Africa. But unfortunately our corporate tax rates are so high, 28%. Then you also have a dividends tax rate of 20%. So you're practically being taxed as income. What was quite interesting, there was one comment that was hidden in the paperwork, where they were actually looking at our controlled foreign company regime. And they said that there is a global trend for corporate tax rates to decrease. And it was quite interesting for me that that was actually acknowledged. And we've got certain rules in our Income Tax Act that basically say that, if there's an exemption for controlled foreign companies that don't actually pull them into the South African tax net, if you pay a certain percentage of taxes or you're in a high tax jurisdiction. And they say that those rules actually need to be looked at, and our percentage inclusion rate should be brought down in line with the global trends that are coming down. So whilst they didn't say that our tax rates are high, it's almost implied that they've noticed this trend. The UK is sitting at 13% corporate tax rate. America's coming down, Australia's coming down. And so I wouldn't be surprised if in the next couple of years we actually see corporate tax rates in South Africa coming down.
Moody's report now in March about South Africa, and people talk about a downgrade. They're likely.
The brand is so strong that I can't see them losing. They may have interesting outcomes in the Western Cape, and they may have an interesting outcome in Gauteng. But for the rest, you can almost write the narrative already. You can go and fill in the blocks almost. That's how predictable things are. But once that's over, Cyril has approximately, in my view, 5 to 6 years to do what he wanted to do, because then the ANC process is going to caught up with him. So that's really the window we've got. After the election, 4 to 5 years.
What about these economics that they talk about? If our corporate taxes are so high, what is it, 28%?
28%.
How do you start economic zones with high corporate taxes?
Well, that's the problem. So they did mention that they'll be looking at they mentioned that they're going to be looking at that in this coming year, that there is a disconnect between the tax relief that they want to give you for the economic zoning, the objectives that they're trying to achieve, and what you're actually getting. And there is this disconnect. So hopefully we will see some good proposals coming through to offer that relief.
At what tax rate do you think we will get money because we are a lower tax regime? Or what rate do you think it should be?
Well, I think it should be closer. I think it should be 20s, if not high teens.
Can you have this disconnect that you tax the middle class high but you have low corporate taxes? Does that make sense?
Well, the point is that entrepreneurs invest in their businesses. They take small salaries out and they want to receive dividend income. So they want their businesses to grow and they want to receive their dividend income. And they will take small salaries out. And so that is really where the starting point is. And so, individual tax rates for me is not really as important as corporate tax rates. Because ultimately that is where the growth is. People starting businesses, foreign companies coming, starting businesses. We're all talking about private capital here. No one is going to want to invest in this country if they say, oh, well, my private capital, my investment, I'm going to lose 50% of it. And so
what about assets? What about land? Do you think the debate around land has a degree of uncertainty in it?
Massive uncertainty. I mean, we've got, most of our clients are international, and the biggest, 80% of my day talks about how we can externalize wealth to get it out of the country. And one thing that we also forget, you know, we're very focused on tax. Exchange control is also a problem for South Africa and foreign investment into the country. And as I say, that's where Mauritius has got it right, to be the entry into Africa, where it should actually be South Africa.
I'm going to give you an opportunity to ask questions, so think in the meantime, because it has happened in the past that I have this type of thing, and then when I say question time, then everybody sits there with the mouthful tongue. But Mohammed, I don't know, unless you know something that I don't know, I don't know a democracy with 27% unemployment rate that could sustain a liberal democratic state. I don't know something like that. We've been doing quite well, I think, for the last 25 years. But surely, this is a problem. Because when Tito Mboweni yesterday said, Terra Lekota, go and tell the people to pay. It's 27% unemployment people. I can tell you now, the people in Soweto who doesn't pay are unemployed. And even if they paid half of the South African labour force that are formally employed earns less than 4,000 rand a month, how the hell do you think they're going to pay it, Mom?
Well, they don't even pay their e-tolls.
Yeah, but how are they going to pay? Well, that's me you. That's me you. How do you think, if they want to change the narrative and they say people must start paying, people say, well, give us the opportunity to pay, give us a job to pay. Is there not, like you say, a disconnect there? Because Mike Schuster tells me that we will not in the next 25 years, there's no possibility of us having fewer than, or was it less, fewer or less, than 9.5 million people unemployed in South Africa. He says there's no economic growth that can solve that problem. We will not have less than 9 million because there are too many people coming into the system. How do we solve that one? Sorry about the question.
It's the fundamental question about South Africa. How do you manage a country with a surplus supply of low skilled labor? Now, on the one hand, it's a problem, but it can be an opportunity. But then you've got to find the industries that can absorb low skilled labor. The National Development Plan has identified, and agriculture is one of those. Right? It's a big employer if you can get it right. But if I can just take a step back, what's happening to the South African economy here is derivative of what's happening in the world. There's a global cooling down, and South Africa is going into a freeze. We talk about, almost optimistically, about 1.5%, maybe 2% growth. I'm not sure we're even going to get there. It's grinding to a halt. Now, you could do maverickish things like what Trump has done, is cut taxes to the extent that the private sector then has money in hand to go and spend, and it does fuel the economy. It's the one country in the world that I think is defying everyone else, because it is fueling growth with private capital.
The UK have just dropped their corporate rates from 18 to 13.
So you could in South Africa do the same. And I thought, given that Tito has this maverickishness about him, is that he was going to take the chance, cut taxes, and see if you can fuel consumption-led growth.
And the income is too low to do that. They have to borrow more if they lower tax, because it takes 3 years for that to filter through the system.
But remember, the biggest contributors to our tax is private individuals.
Yeah,
firstly, then VAT, then corporate tax.
Yeah, I agree.
So if you put more money in people's hands domestically, they will spend it domestically. They'll not move the money offshore. I'm equally concerned about the extent to which there's capital outflow and wealth outflow from this country that's unlikely to be returned in the next 10 years. So there's a major leak.
Well, why I don't buy the two-view argument about comparing us with other countries is they have low inflation, they have low interest rates, they have low unemployment, they have sufficient economic growth. We can't put these apples and pears. You can't say, well, that we will follow the rest of the world in terms of trends.
We're unique in several cases. For instance, we're unique in the world in that you can buy a coat hanger at a traffic light. That's unique. It's not few places in the world where you buy your coat hangers there at the traffic light. Secondly, we're unique where our unions have marches for unemployment. Just think about that. They march because there's too much unemployment. Now the marches can cause unemployment, but that's part of the uniqueness. I think South Africa, if you look at redistribution, and interestingly, he mentioned in his speech, this budget is a redistributionist budget. Between 17 and 18 million South Africans are dependent on government grants, which the middle class is basically financing.
Actually, 11 million, there's 17 million grants, but there's 11 million people receive.
11 million people, yeah. Some people receive them twice or different things. You get 3.
I got 2 children and my wife.
I never got Europe in Lusasa and these kind of things involved. But so that one helps with the unemployment. The second part, of course, for government to make the budget work is, in all probability, the 2 million people working for government in the different levels will get anything from a 4 to a 5% increase in tax. And since they haven't dealt with tax creep or whatever, that amount of increase will flow back into the fiscus. So that's actually a given. You provide the money, but you take it back in a sly way. If you look at the increase in pensions and in these kind of things, they didn't provide a percentage increase, they gave a number. You get 40 Rand more. That's one of the things in which, so there's a fine balancing act managing poverty. And I think, I agree, the unemployment rate is very high, but in a certain sense, one must look differently at it. People live under those conditions, and the state provide a safety net that is, if you really look at a kid going to school, he receives, in the province at least where I live, at birth, the payment for his sustainability starts at 400 Rand per month. Then, when he finishes school that he doesn't pay for, he now goes to university that he also doesn't pay for. So this guy, or girl, lives on the state at least until he's 20, 21 years old. And then from 18 onwards, we call them unemployed. I'm not exactly sure how numbers are working.
David tells me that if we didn't have the Zuma years, imagine, if we didn't have the Zuma years, he said the economy would have been 15% bigger, and 2.5 million more people would have worked in the economy. That's incredible. The damage has been done. But
I agree with that.
Yeah, Mohammed, if you look at the budget, and if you could say to Tito Mboweni a tip for Tito, include the next thing, something that he didn't do, what could it be that you will say, well, I should have done that?
You know, the principle we used when we wrote the National Development Plan was, it doesn't help you try and work with the country you want, unless you work with the country you have. Now, the country we have, I mean, the thing about the budget is not what you're spending the money on, or how much you're spending it on, but whether it's the right kind of spending. And the fundamental problem we have with our country at the moment, given all the corruption and service delivery issues, is, do we have the right people in the right jobs? And that's where the real issue is. It doesn't help you try and fire people at the bottom end of the continuum. It makes a small contribution economically, but the real issue is who's in charge of running the place. Take Eskom as a typical example. And it's the same for all the other parastatals, and they all get into trouble the same way. The municipalities, it's the same thing. Usually it's designed by engineers, technocrats, who build a thing and it has certain design flaws like you can expect, and then to try and fix it, you get in the accountants who start running it. So you start with management as engineers, they followed by accountants who start up the income, cut the cost, change the tariffs, and so on, and that creates a certain tension in that organization. And then after them, they bring in, because of that tension, they say get rid of those guys, and then they get in the social scientists, the economists, and the HR people who try and run the organization.
And then they bring the Italians like Eskom now.
And the fundamental problem with Eskom is an engineering problem. It's not a human resource problem. So now you have HR people trying to solve an engineering problem. Eskom has two fundamental problems that needs to be solved. It needs to fix the maintenance and the engineering side of things. And they know there's a period in which they must do that. And then it must reduce the head office costs dramatically, because that's the cost that was just massively escalated in the Zuma years. Those things are fixable. Once you fix the people, the rest of it will hopefully follow. There's a better chance of getting it right. And the same with all the government departments. You've got to change who's the Director General, who's the Minister, and who's the Deputy Director General if you're going to fix the way it happens there. You've got to change the municipal manager and who runs the utilities, and they will fix it. And I think maybe the budget might not be the place for that. But the future, in other words, from here onwards, it's about getting the right people, the capable people in place to run this economy.
So guys, one more question, I'll give you the opportunity. I packed down many a scrum behind Mohammed when we were students. We were students together and we played in the same rugby team. He was prop, as you can see. I was scrum off. I'm lying, I was 8 man. I'm going to ask you one more provocative question, because you sound offended by the likeliness of the IMF coming to the party in South Africa. Well, what you say is what the IMF will probably say. We need technocrats and expertise and stuff. What is this thing about South Africa, this hang-up not wanting to change? Because ideologically, we are in the 1960s. If you listen to the ANC, to the comrades and the Kailers, it sounds like we're in the bloody 1960s. I mean, really, you have to now start changing your mind. The world economy functions in a very, very different way. You are offended by the likeliness of the IMF coming here. Why do I get this impression that black South Africans have a bloody problem with changing the narrative, the mindset of how we think about modern economies? The ANC was on the Thabo Mbeki era, other modern political party. They're back in the 1960s. Unless the ANC modernized, we cannot modernize South Africa. But what is this hang-up about what the IMF may prescribe to South Africans? What is the problem?
I think there are two problems. The one is South Africans, the ruling party, and the history of liberation in this country says that there is always this idea about a global conspiracy to try and control the world. And that global conspiracy is run out of places like Washington and New York. It started with the likes of a Washington Consensus, for instance, and there are institutions created to control the world in a certain way. And the IMF and World Bank is that. But show me a country in Africa where the IMF and the World Bank has got in and rescued that country and put it onto a new growth path. Now, whether that conspiracy is true or not doesn't matter. And you know, I love the fact that we still disagree on things like we did in our student days. The real issue is, do we really need them? And I don't think we do.
But then I agree, because I think this thing was started by R.W. Johnson, that we will get the IMF in and this and that and the other thing. He's an old man, and he's also stuck in his years. What Mike Schuster, which you quoted earlier on, has worked out that the pension schemes in South Africa, if you put them all together, are the 8th largest in the world in dollar terms. There's enough money and other places closer to government that they can allocate for this rather than to go to the IMF, which I think is what they're going to do in the first instance before they ask for international money. And then the second point I would like to make, this thing about conspiracy and conspiracy theories, it is incredible how these guys subscribe to it. And there's a wonderful book out with a wonderful title. It's called Suspicious Minds.
Elvis Presley.
That's the song of Elvis. But the book is out. The book is out. Robinson wrote the book Suspicious Minds, Why People Believe in Conspiracies. Get that? It's fascinating how and conspiracies are driven by ideological views about things.
But
so you connect the points.
Is that not the job of leadership to undermine conspiracy theories? And I think that's what, by the way, I think that is what Ramaphosa is doing. I think that's what Mboweni is doing. He said, we cannot allow ourselves to be determined, to be guided by conspiracies. Listen, I'm going to ask you guys to have a question. I want you to be soft on Mohammed and hard on him, and then realistic with her.
I just want to comment. I think a country in Africa which has done quite well from foreign funding is Rwanda. So don't discount the IMF, World Bank out completely. I think that if you're going to look at the model of Rwanda, what they've done, digital and the whole infrastructure, it's very good. Just my question I want to add to what was said earlier, prescribed assets, which is obviously the pension fund area where we were in the 80s, where you were told, pension funds were told X amount has to go to government projects. Do you think that is a reality? Is it possible with the climate we're living right now? Because that is a very good way of funding your growth and turnaround strategy in the country, but it could be very negative for the investment professionals in the investment environment as well. So, I mean, is that the ANC? Is it a probability that they will look there?
Yeah, prescribed assets, that's the formal, that debate is taking place in the ANC at the moment. They have this thing about the IMF and the World Bank, and we've discussed it about the conspiracy. On Rwanda, I just want to say it's true, Rwanda did well, but Rwanda is not a democracy. Rwanda is run by an autocrat. So if you have a leader like Mboweni that runs the space, he keeps it very firmly in control, you can manage that situation. The question is, if you do, at what point do you leave the sticks, or do you become just over time a second Mugabe? That's the risk of Rwanda at the moment. So Rwanda is looking good currently, but there is no succession plan. There's nothing beyond Museveni. And in that sense, South Africa, I think two countries in the world are under-evaluated in terms of what they've really brought about. One is India. If you look at India, India has dealt with its political problems in the 70s and the 80s. India is today the most democratic poor country in the world. If you compare India to China, China's political problems are still waiting for them. If their growth goes beyond 5% economic growth, they cannot sustain the expectations that they've created among their own people. So India is over that. They've done it. South Africa, in a sense, is a little bit like India. Selling coat hangers at a traffic light, to me, is the thing. If you can understand that, you can understand this country. But I think prescribed assets is where the ANC is currently thinking.
But maybe Elizabeth, what is, from your perspective, about prescribed assets and the fact that it might be used in infrastructure, state infrastructure?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, government wants to encourage you to, you know, they bring in lots of benefits for pension schemes, provident funds, etc., and they did mention it in the budget, saying that they are going to be looking at it and bringing some changes. They do encourage people to contribute, and in fact, it's been on the agenda for a long time. So, I mean, it would make sense for them to encourage people to contribute your assets in, and then they use it. So it
but
makes sense
it
for it
doesn't
to
work
happen.
out the state back that up. In other words, if they make an investment, say, in infrastructure, and the idea is that the money of the pension fund is actually invested profitably. In other words, people must make money because it's invested well. But if you use it for infrastructure project, how do you make money, by the way? Do you know how do they expect to make a dividend or a profit on?
Well, the development bank paid back its debt.
The
development bank paid back its debt. It was announced yesterday.
The land bank.
DBSA. There is money in infrastructure development because it's long-term loans, low interest rate, building bridges and what. So there is absolutely
Is it possible?
Global market there.
Okay, do you answer the question? The other one? Yes.
Good morning. First of all, I would like to thank Investec for hosting this breakfast in Stellenbosch, who is also part of the global conspiracy. But then I would like to take you to a city in a land down under called Melbourne. what would we have discussed today had we all been Australians in Melbourne? And somebody once said, Australia's biggest problem is that it doesn't have a big problem. And aren't we as South Africans, and especially today in Stellenbosch, privileged that we are members or experiencing change in a country that has got so much potential? Just look at our papers this morning. There's never a shortage of news in our newspapers. That was my introduction. I would like to ask two questions. Number one, nobody has mentioned our friend Mr. Julius Malema. And my question is, what's the probability of the EFF becoming the next official opposition? And the second part is, nobody has mentioned Mr. David Mabuza. What will happen after 7 years when Cyril isn't our leader or our president any longer? Thank you.
Okay, I will start asking the one question because I love this part so much. I might be wrong and things might have changed, but I one day was loitering around Pretoria House for some useless reason. And Sikli Sikilala from KwaZulu-Natal was also loitering around for some useless reason there. But he happened to walk into the president, bump into the president, and they started talking. And I promise you, I'm not lying to you. And he said to the president, listen, man, I know you have a problem with getting KwaZulu-Natal into the fold. You know, it's a hard one for you. You alienated them when you beaten Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma at the leadership conference. But there are some things that we have in common. And one of them is that both of us don't like David Mabuza. The president said, don't ask me that. He said, yeah, I expected you don't like him. So I tell you what, if you can look at the list, for instance, and you can move David a little bit down. I'll talk to Ace. Ace also don't like David anymore. Just move him a little bit down the list, and you use the excuse that you must have male, female, which is quite a strong narrative within the ANC. Then we can move Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma in there, and you can solve many problems. First of all, KwaZulu-Natal is then supporting you, and secondly, the Women's League will also follow you. Because the Women's League is you know, yeah, but the Billy Dlamini is important there, but Nkosazana is much more important. So we can fix that problem. So I don't know if that's going to play out, but I know that discussion was going on. And I know that throughout the ANC, there are rumblings. Why don't we get rid of David Mabuza? Because if the morning that Cyril Ramaphosa don't feel well, I tell you now, if he breathes heavily in the morning and he doesn't feel well, we are in serious trouble because David Mabuza is your next president. There's no doubt about that. But I think there is a discussion in the ANC to deal with the matter. It is possible, and you will see that the president has since then used Nkosazana for various very important functions. It's almost at the level, the same level. If he gives one job to David Mabuza, he gives one job to Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma. So I think he's in some other way preparing the situation for the likeliness, but he will expect Ace Magashule to do the dirty work for him and move David Mabuza down the list. They're busy working on that, especially since they want to, this ethics committee thing that will investigate things. I don't know if it's going to happen. It might be because David Mabuza forced himself the last time on the president. He might be successful again. The only problem is he doesn't have a constituency within the ANC that supports him at all. Whereas Nkosazana Dlamini does have a constituency. So, like the president said, watch the space. I wouldn't be surprised if David Mabuza is not your next deputy president, but I'm often wrong. I could be wrong again. Theo, what about the EFF?
Yeah, if you look at the figures, facts and figures, or like my French friend in Washington, D.C., he can speak very good English at the moment, but he still say facts and figures. So that part, if you look at those,
What's wrong with that?
then you'll see the way in which people registered for the election is a turnaround pyramid. The young people registered at very low levels, and then the registration of the 20 to 30-year-olds is also fairly low, and then this pyramid suddenly widens, the 30 to 40-year-olds, and then if you look at it percentage-wise, the people that have registered most of between 70 and 80 years old. Although they're small, but they registered virtually 100%. Now, if you go to the election and you look at the demography, then the pyramid, of course, looks like that. Few old people, a lot of young people, but the young people didn't register. Currently, we've got 37 million South Africans that may register to elect or to take part in election. Only 26.7 million registered. So there are 10 million South Africans that didn't even bother to register. So keep them out because we can't do much about it. Of the people registered, the EFF has a band of support. The 18 to 19-year-olds, the 20 to 30-year-olds. Although the ANC did a funny thing, they've declared youth to be younger than 35. That to me still is an anomaly. By 35, you're scared already. You can't be youth. But I see the Americans did a wonderful thing. They have now declared 65 as fairly young. I'm approaching that fairly young age now.
Just remember that between 18 and 21, that age bracket, only 16% of people in that age bracket are registered. Only 16% between 18 and 21. If you push it up, it goes into the 20s. And that is the hunting ground for the EFF. In the past, but there's another factor that plays a role. Just remember, the EFF is actually the party of the black middle class. They got the majority of their support amongst the black middle class, and that because the youth are not registered, a very small group of the youth actually do support it, electorally support it. The thing about the black middle class is, and Max de Pre always explains that quite nicely, is that the natural enemy of the black middle class sits in the boardrooms and in the corporate sector and in the workplace. That's where racism is the most rife, because of the very nature, the competitive nature sometimes of that sector of the economy. Which means that is the reason why the black middle class votes for the EFF. And if they could manage to get the youth out, they could overtake, like your biggest fear is, they could overtake the DA easily and become a 25 and a 30% party.
Yeah, but I think they're going to stuck to 8%. And
10%.
10%. Okay. But let's do the figure 8. 10%. What I expect us to see on the 9th of May is that the ANC wouldn't make 60%. But they would be somewhere in between. My gut feeling tells me in the high 50s rather than in the low 50s.
But what are the likeliness that unions are the reason why we will probably not break up Eskom eventually in the way that the minister foresees?
I'm not too concerned. Firstly, I count on the president's diplomacy, and he's an artist in that regard, to get the unions together before the elections. I think this is just a season in which they state their case. And one's got to be careful of thinking that a strong opinion is a majority. It's not. It's just a strong opinion. This country is not as unionized as it appears, but they'll pull some big stunts to make their point. Ultimately, the tripartite alliance must hold for the ANC to get its majority. And they usually get it together just before the elections. So I'm less concerned about that. Even with the renegade unions, the UMPUs of this world, I doubt that it will get worse before it gets better.
But what I can say is that the COSATU especially is about 2/3 of what used to be in the previous election in 2014, with NAMSA moving out. So they're not the strong entity it used to be. And why is the union so important for the tripartite alliance? People don't realize this, but every COSATU office of every member of COSATU really becomes a party office towards the election. So the infrastructure of those political or those unions are crucial to the ANC's election effort. And that is, it's about 1/3 of COSATU just moved out, and they don't have that. And there's one party we haven't discussed really, just a new kid on the block, and that is NUMSA's own party, which they are saying that they can herd. The guys talk about us academics, it's like herding cats. I think unions are very similar. they can herd up to 500,000 people to vote for them in this coming election. 500,000 people are 10 votes in Parliament, or 10 seats.
Yeah, just, I mean, you mentioned we talk about privatization and private capital and agricultural sector being so important in job creation. The problem is that with all the labor law issues that there are at the moment, it's become incredibly frustrating for employers to have to deal with this constant issue and this constant labor law issue that you have. And I've started seeing a big trend in business owners starting to go mechanical. So the very sector that, we trying to rely on, being agriculture, is one that is saying we're actually so sick of dealing with all these labor law issues and we want to just go mechanical. So, I mean, it is an issue.
The unions don't even exist in agriculture, really. The interesting thing about what she says is that Donald Trump makes a big fuss about Mexicans taking American jobs. But somebody made the sums, and mechanization and artificial intelligence has ruined many more jobs than the Mexicans did in the American industrial economy.